Hello, good morning, everyone. But in my time zone, have to say good night because it's already approaching to the midnight. And today, my topic is make note taking serve your learning to the fullest. And this study focuses on the issues of note taking in a context of higher education. Before we start, I will take a look at the reason why this study is conducted. Um, the motivation or the driver for this study comes mainly from the concern among a lot of university or higher ed lecturers on effectiveness in note taking in higher education. And one of the sources of the concern is the unsatisfactory performance in note taking among higher education students. Well, according to my personal observation about um, the students that I taught when I was a lecturer in China, most of them just told me that they've lost their skills of note taking since their entrance into their university, because their university life was mainly consisted of, doing presentations, reading articles through PDF on the computer, and they did not actually form a good habit of note taking, especially the handwritten ones, as they did in your senior or even junior high school. So that's probably the reason why most students felt unsatisfactory in terms of their note taking performance. And another reason comes from the boom in commercial note taking services available thanks to the technological development, especially different kinds of apps or softwares for note taking. And some scholars just pointed out that the availability of the technological devices is a kind of double-edged sword for the effectiveness of note taking. On the one hand, it really facilitates and offers more alternatives for note taking. On the other hand, it may or may not really facilitate the process. So, because of such kind of concern, we aim to just have the big picture of the issues of note taking in higher education through systematic review. And the methodology for this study is integrative literature review. For the first step, we searched the articles concerning note taking in higher education with two strings of keywords. One is the higher education, which specifically refers to the university, college, or CJEP. And another string is words or any cognate of note taking, the words like notes, take, or taking, or takes. And we searched the articles on the several databases, including Education Source Complete, Scopus, ERIC, SSCI, and a complementary index. And we just narrowed down our search after the year from 1991 to 2019. And here are the criteria for our including and excluding the articles. And one is we only included the English language publications, and we just delete all the publications written in other languages. And we also eliminate all the articles about foreign language learning. We didn't really think that it's not important, but it does not just fall into our this study because foreign language learning is not really applicable to most students in other countries like Canada because it is mainly targeting at international students whose mother tongue is not English or French. So attendance in foreign language training prepares them to succeed in their later education, but it's not really applicable for most students there. And also the another criteria is availability of the articles. Unfortunately, a few articles cannot be really obtained because of both technical issues and the copyright issues. And we also rely on the judgment of other researchers. And content irrelevance is another source of possibly excluding some of the articles that are not really relevant, even if it indeed includes the keywords of higher education, university, and note taking. And finally, we obtained 33 articles from the original 96 articles from the first attempt. And by analyzing the 33 articles, we reported all the data according to the three main issues. The first one simply is the definition of note taking or what's note taking. And second comes to the benefits and the challenges of particular note taking methods. And the third would take a look at whether there are characteristics of note taking within six specific disciplinary areas in higher ed, which include commerce, engineering, fine arts, humanities, natural sciences, and social sciences. That's another reason why we did not include foreign language learning here because it does not really fall into any of these six areas. And now, uh, just a report briefly about the results of the integrative literature review on the 33 articles. First, what's note taking? Generally speaking, a lot of scholars just define note taking as to record, to process, to manipulate, to anticipate and review information to facilitate our study and work. And there are two major functions of note taking from the academic perspective. One is the function of encoding, which means to facilitate the students' in depth information processing while they're taking down notes. And in another word, it really helps them to make what they've heard or what they've read into the information in their brain on their own way. And another function is the external storage. And this is a very important function to reduce the cognitive load of the students. It simply means that when students take down notes, they can just refer to it later because human beings tend to be forgetful. And now comes to the benefits of different kinds of types of notes or notes taking. Uh, in terms of the form, there are generally two types of notes. One is handwritten, which is also called traditional, longhand, and paper and pen notes. And the benefits of that is the deeper interpreting and the understanding of the information. As we know that when we really take down notes with our hands, with our pens or pencils, it's a great chance for us to deeply process the information that we take notes for. Well, other than the handwritten form, typed notes on computer or on e-devices is the alternative. It is, of course, much faster, especially when we need a huge amount of information or the kind of things like facts or surface processing tasks. And this is much more effective for such a kind of information and tasks. Um, and also, when a large amount of notes hopes to be shared through the computer or e-devices, um, Google Drive is a very good choice here. And here, let's take a look at the types of notes in terms of its structure. Well, there's one type of notes called long linear notes. It's not really the same with the linear notes that follow this certain kind of order from the beginning to the end. For the linear notes, um, students can just take notes according to their understanding and organize in their own way. And among the scholars, it is generally regarded as more effective than linear notes because it can present links more explicitly because students do not have to follow the certain orders. They will just use their own ways to organize the information and just demonstrate the links between different things more directly. And another benefit is that it is more visually accessible. And here's the very commonly used form, which the note takers just write the keywords in the middle with the details around. So it is really helpful for quickly understand the notes when they later want to just refer to that again. And another type of note in terms of structure is guided notes in class. This kind of notes means the kind of partially done notes by the lecturer with the titles, subtitles, and some information as reminder finished before they are distributed to the students. And still, the other parts of information are left blank for the students to fill or to take notes by themselves. And these information that is left blank for the students is also the one that is important and is the one that the lecturer wants students really to remember and have a good command of. And this really motivates students to spend more time processing information on their own without just taking a look at what the lecturer gives to them. And it proves by many scholars that it is proved, excuse me, by a lot of scholars that a greater performance can occur than those provided with complete notes. And here comes the challenges. For handwritten note, the challenge is pretty obvious, um, which is being slower and more time consuming. And for the type notes on computer or other e-devices, just because of its superficial processing, it plays a weaker role in recalling of the knowledge. And it is especially true for the cut and paste notes, since the popular use of e-devices and computer, a lot of so kind of lazy students will just take down notes from just cut and paste without even just typing them because it is pretty fast, but it really allows for little information processing, and this is one of the mm, most significant challenges. And another challenge lies in off-task multitasking issues. When students take notes through their computer doing cut and paste while scanning on a phone or on a computer screen, it's really difficult for them to concentrate on only one thing, especially when the lecturer is uh, s- speaking to the public. And here, I would like to point out some challenges of a particular kind of note, which is prior class note handout. And for a lot of scholars, this type is always the complete note, a sheet of notes with everything filled and prepared by the professors. The professors really intend to offer students the chance to preview the important points before the lecture, but it just uh, creates some opposite effect, which means when students get such kind of handout with complete notes, um, they just do not actually spend a lot of time previewing before class, since it, they really think that it is enough, and they do not have to spend time just reviewing that. And what's worse, it can give rise to class skipping if this kind of notes are delivered to the students, and they may think, okay, so I'll just take a look at the notes before the examination, that's it, and there's no value in attending any courses. And finally, take a look at the characteristics of note taking within 6 disciplinary areas. And among the 33 searched articles, 22 of them refer to specific disciplinary areas. And among the 22, 15 out of them are within social sciences. And within the 15, 7 out of them are about psychology. And both social sciences and psychology are kind of strong patterns. And this is possibly attributed to the reason that the topic of note taking is much sought in a field of psychology and education, just because it has a lot to do with the concept of cognitive load, about the memory or of any concepts in these two fields. And because of this, the professors in this field tend to just look for the samples and their the design of their study by just sample the students in their own major, and this is much more convenient for them to just find the samples. So we can see that most of the studies are actually conducted in courses of psychology. And we also find that quite a few articles pointed out the special issues of note taking in their particular fields, most only on generic issues. We can see that um, in the area of engineering and fine arts, there are no articles concern are found, and the two articles are focused on the discipline of commerce and humanities. And for commerce, the issues and the suggestions pointed out in an article are just generic to many other fields. For humanities, only one of them just points out the strategies of in-class note-taking, which contributes to the in-class spiritual experience because it's the course of a religious study, which is a Christianity course to be specific. And for natural sciences, 4 articles are focused on this field. And one of the articles just discussed the importance of guided notes for in a math class to overcome the limitations of chalk talk mode, which means when the when students are taking notes, the lecturer is just showing the procedure of calculation and solving equation by just writing on blackboard from time to time. And so guided notes here can really help to solve this issue. Otherwise, students will just struggle in note taking, looking at the blackboard while understanding the procedures. And for social sciences, especially the psychology, uh, also find that the most issues pointed out in these studies of note taking are generic to many other fields, even if they offer a lot of suggestions indeed. So finally, let's take a look at what kind of suggestions can be drawn from the integrative literature review on 33 articles, both for practices and research. And first one we really suggest the teachers can try to combine handwritten notes and computer or e-devices notes in different contexts due to their respective benefits and challenges. So for notes in large amounts or those notes just about the quick facts and the ones that only need very shallow processing, computer notes are much better, would be much better. Well, for the notes that um, about the knowledge that the teachers want students to remember, well, handwritten notes will be more useful, just because in this way, it's really helpful for students to process the information on their own and just facilitate their recalling and understanding. And then we really suggest the lecturer to offer training in long, non-linear notes skills to the students in higher education. So as we see that non-linear notes are generally superior to linear ones. So this is quite a significant skill to be trained among students. And then we also suggest the lecturer to use guided notes for the scaffolding in class. And with guided notes, it's both good for students to quickly grasp the outline of the course while they have opportunities to take notes on their own and process the information in a more deep way. And also, the educators or teachers should be careful about the convenience of note taking with e devices. Yes, it's indeed fast and convenient, but the cut and paste and the multitasking can create a lot of problems, as I just introduced about the challenges just now. And also, the pre class notes should be a caution as well, because it easily demotivates students from class participation and engagement. And finally, in a future research, the scholars are expected to compare note-taking strategies or suggestions among various disciplines, and hopefully, some suggestions can be proposed just specific to the one area or one discipline instead of just proposing the solutions that are generic to different fields. But actually, as we all know that different fields have their own characteristics and have their own best ways to acquire knowledge and take notes. So such kind of particularities should be covered. And the examples can be maybe the differences in recommended structures of notes or the specific logics of notes or what kind of key points should be emphasized, which points are less important whatsoever. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, I would like you to just reflect and maybe comments below. Thanks.
Um, Before we begin, let me remind you of one thing. This session will be recorded, and as you know, you have 15 minutes for your presentation and 5 minutes for question period. So now it's time for presenting Marie-Ève Lefebvre. Excuse me if I don't correctly pronounce your name. And her topic is transitioning to online learning for students with ASD. So welcome, Marie-Ève.
Thank you very much. You pronounced my name correctly. That's all good.
Thank
Super
you.
French, so no worry. Can I start by presenting my PowerPoint? Or is it a little bit early? I cannot hear you.
Maybe in 4 minutes.
Okay, perfect. I'm gonna just slowly get ready. Okay, then presenter mode. Okay. How can I see people cameras? Because I cannot see anybody now.
It's because you're sharing your screen.
Okay, is it possible to see both or not?
So I did a bunch of research on this, and it's sort of possible. Are you viewing your own presentation in full screen?
Yeah.
So if you don't have it full screen,
okay,
then you can see both. And there's a way to set up your screen share. So you share just like a rectangle, and that's what you need to do.
Oh, okay, cool. Let me try that.
Yeah.
If not,
So
I'm just gonna assume.
Yeah. Now, if you go to screen share,
okay.
Then across the top, you see basic, advanced, and files.
Oh, okay.
Click advanced.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, and then portion of screen. Yeah.
Wow.
Just be careful because it's very non-private. Whatever you drag that rectangle over, we're gonna see.
Yeah, it's funny because I give training for people to use Zoom, but like in a really basic level. But it's like so basic, we don't even cover that. It's like just be able to share your screen.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can see now just my it's just annoying because
to us it looks the same as it did before.
Yeah, but I don't even see your face.
So now if you go to view,
I can do it. Yeah, I can do that. Okay, great.
Yeah, I actually spent like an hour yesterday like looking this up and then seeing if it was gonna be possible, because at the beginning of mine I'm like, raise your hand if, and I didn't know if I could include that or not.
Really? Yeah. It's funny, usually I'm not in this room and I have 2 screens, so it's like I don't even have to think about that, but right now it's like I only have 1. How can I work with that?
I think you can start now. It's 10:50.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's going to be a very intimate presentation, but that's okay. So my name is Lefebvre, and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Montreal. I started last fall after completing, with that. After completing a couple course at the Master in Andragogy, which is the study of adult education. And my subject abroad is transitioning to high school to post-secondary school for autistic students. But in this topic, I'm also interested into the transition to online learning. So especially because of the pandemic, this subject is very trendy. So it's really good for presentation. I can talk about it a little bit more in more details. So it's very exciting for me. So I'm gonna skip over the outline because a little bit of time missing here. But first of all, what is online learning transition? So if we only take online learning is pretty much everything right now regarding apps and software that we use to support any teaching related activities. Only using your phone would be considered online learning. It is very broad, and I went with a very broad definition as well, because right now it can take different form. It can also be just using emails. It can be as basic as that. And before the pandemic era, let's say, we would use it as a complement to our learning. We would be in class, but we would access PowerPoint throughout our Moodle, for example. We would go to our Google Drive and we would just use our computer as a tool for our learning. But as we transition because of the pandemic to online learning in higher education, so for CEGEP and university, most of the people had to basically switch from in-presence to completely online learning. So these tools became necessary and not only a complement to learning. So without having access to those, we would not be able to access learning in this higher education setup. So it became very interesting how they became necessary, and we can't just go on with our student life without them. So it has very let's say it varies some advantages and disadvantages for some people depending of their preference, but some of the advantage of this transition to online learning was the flexibility. Most of the students enjoy being at home and being able to follow their course from their place, to be able to juggle a little bit with different classes, to have different schedule. If you have, for example, class at night, maybe it was not as difficult as before because you didn't have to go on campus. And this is particularly interesting if the class is asynchronous, meaning that the class is done on your own, at your own pace. So you can basically do the class whenever you're free, which offer a lot of flexibility. Also, some of the advantages is usually, not all the time, it comes with low cost. Just thinking about the commute, you don't have to go to school, you don't have to buy a bus pass, or just buying any manuals. Usually everything is online and it's cheaper, or it's free, so that's a good thing. But some of the disadvantage that some students experienced was the fact that socialization became very unnatural. I'm thinking especially about students who they tried, they entered a new program, or they just started college, or they just started university. Their first semester was without any usual socialization. So no back to school party, no, let's say, kind of gathering at the beginning to get to know each other, no activities like that. Everything was done online, and it wasn't natural in the sense that it was more, you had to be invited, and then there was more, let's say, organization around that, even though it was different. It was not as immersive as an experience as other type of first semester in presence. And it's the same for people who were already in school. The way that they connect with colleague or professor were quite different. Also, we can think about how the transition to online learning is not adapted to all students. We can think about learning preferences. We can think about how some students, they prefer learning with others, with the human contact, and also having individual teaching, having mentor. All of that is more difficult online. Or just thinking about the environment. Is home going to be a good place to learn? If you have siblings, if you don't have necessarily a room, like an office, or if you have roommates, it can be difficult to only learn in your space at home. So now that I've talked about a more general approach to online learning transition, specifically in my topic, I'm interested into autistic students, basically because it is my broad topic, but online learning is interesting for them because, as you can see, it removes kind of the social aspect of learning. It removed the in presence, it removed the informal aspect of it. And it's what autistic students struggle with usually. So social characteristic, as a reminder, in autistic student can be a difficulty to verbally or non-verbally interact with others. So it can take many forms, and this is a beauty of the spectrum, is that someone on the spectrum is going to be different from another person on the spectrum. Everybody has their different strengths and weaknesses. And for example, regarding verbal interaction, it can be, excuse me, it can be regarding the tone of voice can be quite different. It can be fluctuating in a weird manner. The level of voice, it can be loud, it can be very quiet. The vocabulary can be very, very expressive. It can be detailed, but it can be really, really limited as well. The eye contact could be difficult, or it could be maybe too intense. The posture might be unnatural. So we could see that some aspects for autistic students are difficult, but they change from a person to another, which is why you need to consider an holistic success for them in higher education, meaning that you cannot only focus on the academic aspect of learning. You cannot just focus on grades and everything. The difficulty of autistic student are sometimes grades, and sometimes they're very good, sometimes they're excellent, and sometimes it's the integration into higher education that's more difficult. So we need to think about success not only for grades, but also to interact with others, to be able to have a sense of community, or just have some colleague with which they can share or just experience or vent about or whatever, to have someone they can relate to. So knowing that, we could see that technology can be a facilitator for their success. We have seen that they might have trouble with social interaction because of the non-verbal aspect of it. It could be more awkward sometimes, but it could be beneficial for them when you remove that part. So when a study was done by Blah and Gay in 2017, they did an interview with autistic students in the university, and most of them said that using technology, sorry for the typo, and technology. So they said that using technology was useful for them because they had to focus. They could focus on only the message, the content of the message, and not just the appearance of it, or how they would appear to other, or the social convention that were kind of implicit to them. They didn't have to worry about that. So that was a good weight that was lifted off their shoulder. And it was also interesting because students mentioned that it was useful to have everything centralized, meaning that yes, they could socialize with other online, they could have their class content, they could ask for help. So it was good that it was without distraction. They could go to one place and just get everything you wanted. So for them, it was sometimes more easy than in person. So that's very cool for them. That's very good. But other people think that technology can be an obstacle. In a study done by Don and colleague, who also did interview with university students, they mentioned that they need to have clear directive. At least 70% of them mentioned that it's imperative to have clear directive. They need to know exactly where to get the content, exactly where to ask questions, where to ask for help, because almost 40% of them mentioned that they were disoriented into this online environment. And this is related to sensory overload, which is particularly frequent in autistic students. And this happened when there is too many stimuli in the environment, and it's difficult to distinguish what's important, and it's difficult also to concentrate and then to understand what's going on. So it creates this disorientation. It can happen online, it can happen pretty much anywhere. So I'm sorry. So the sensory overload was usually influenced by using multiple platforms. So using, for example, a Teams platform, using a Moodle, but then using also emails, then how do you contact your teacher? How do you contact your teammate? So it was sometimes difficult to know how to act online, which adds to the social implicit convention that's sometimes hard to understand for autistic students. Then sometimes they have difficulty express their challenge because it has to be formal, as in a form of email, and it was difficult with the lack of interaction to explain their difficulties. So technology was sometimes harder in that sense for displaying their difficulties and just being helped. So as an explanation of how to help students on the spectrum in higher education, there is this very, very interesting model called the social cultural model of technology access, and basically explained that to be able to fully participate online, to be able to be successful, basically, you need to, thank you, you need to actually be able to access to those different levels. So I'm sorry, I'm just gonna skip through them because I didn't know it would take so long. So they help students on the spectrum, they have to have access to technology. So do they have an electronic device? So if they don't, they need to be able to access tablet, PC, which they can get from library reservation as form of accommodation. Also, do they have the sensory motor skill? Can they physically use a keyboard? If not, they need to have access to adaptive device or to practice. Same for cognitive skill and technical skill. Do they understand how to use technology? Then understand implicit social rules. So do they know how to act online? Do they know, is it okay to spam someone? Is it okay to text someone at midnight? Things like that. So basically, rules needs to be explicit online for them. And online learning can be both benefit and have obstacle, but we need to understand the needs they have. And these students needs to be proactive about tackling those challenges. But the thing is that, where do they get help? How can they be supported and have help from the teacher? So yeah. So basically, that's it for students in the transition to online learning. We're still learning. So
1 minute
yeah.
left.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for your attention. I will be ready to have your question.
Like, anyone has any question, you can ask Marie.
I think Marisa has a question.
Hi. Yes, hi. Hi, Marie. Thank you very much. It was a presentation where I really felt like learning more. I was wondering about, so you mentioned some of the challenges, right, around the focus, and I was wondering in terms of from what you know, what is a good way to engage somebody who might be managing that kind of diagnosis or that kind of reality online? And I know that you mentioned that everybody's different, right? So it's hard to say, but if there's anything you could say about that, that would be amazing. Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you so much for your question. I would say first you have to know that this person has a diagnosis. Sometimes they would not like to say it because they don't want to be stigmatized. So assuming that they disclose it and they told you, I think it's really to listen to them and to don't be afraid to ask what they need. It can be difficult for students, autistic student in higher education, because there is this pressure, and every student feels it. It's to perform, it's to be independent, it's to be autonomous. So students on the spectrum, they don't want to be stigmatized. And sometimes just to be like, to have someone to ask, hey, are you all right with that? Or are you managing the coursework? It's just to check on them, not necessarily in a maniac way for sure, but just to make sure that, are you all right? You know, if there's anything, if you need an extension, you can have it. And sometimes it's just to remind them that they can have accommodation, because that's the thing. Some students on the spectrum and just students in general, they don't know that they can access accommodation because there is this inner stigma to that. I don't want to be someone, I don't want to be handicapped. Like I just don't want to need someone. So I think it's that, to just know that you're there to help.
Thank you very much. Yeah, not to mention the whole circus that you have to go through when you are requesting an accommodation with the papers and does it fit? And then the teacher it has to agree to it. So yeah,
So
I can
sometimes
see
it
why
can
they might
be,
hesitate. Yeah.
yeah, sometimes it can be more informal. You don't necessarily have to go through this whole process. If the teacher, the professor is open-minded and they're willing, they don't have to go through it, especially that it's a more load of work for them, like in surplus of the study.
Hi, Larry. I just have one question. I just wonder, when automation students take online learning, are they alone, or just do they have, or have someone stay with them, like their parents or teacher?
Well, to answer your question, in higher education, usually they're alone. They don't necessarily, they sometimes live alone, they sometimes have roommate. Anybody pretty much could be on the spectrum, but it's really depends on each and everyone. Some individual would need to stay at home to be able to have this social support. Some of them might have a partner who's going to help them, but some of them are very independent and they don't really require to have someone to help them. But sometimes it's a more, how can I say, kind of a rare support they need. Like, just it happens to be more difficult this semester and they would need someone. But it really, really depends, for sure.
Okay, got it. Just what I'm thinking. Some students with autism maybe have some emotion issues or have some learning disabilities. So learning problems. Sorry. So that is what I'm thinking. Maybe most of them need some caregivers, companies like that. So
the thing is that in higher education, the access to service is not automatic. You have to request it. So first of all, you have to say that you are living on the spectrum. You have a autism disorder diagnosis. And like I said earlier, you don't want to be stigmatized. So if you don't have problem, most of them, I would say 90% of people would not say they're autistic. And then if you have problem, you have to go through this whole chain of asking the accommodation. And then because the university service are not really aware of what's the needs of student on the spectrum, they're kind of gonna give them very generic support. So do you need extra time? Do you need a device, electronic device? Do you need a mentor? But sometimes it's just being able to get organized. So sometimes it's really specific, but we're not quite there yet. More people needs to be informed about their needs and how it can vary. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Marie, for your excellent presentation. So our next presentation is about to begin, and it will begin with Emma June, and it will begin at 11:15. Emma June, did you go to the main session? Because
I'm already a co-host. I'm able to share.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I can see you as co-host here. Thank you.
So Emma, hi. Hello. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, so your whole presentation is of 15 minutes and 5 minutes question answers.
Yeah.
So I'm going to inform you after 10 minutes that 5 minutes are left. Then I'm going to inform you at when 2 minutes are left, and then at the later first minute, the last minute. Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can you see the PowerPoint right now?
Yes, exactly.
It's
And
taking up the whole screen. Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, so our next presentation is with Emma June Huebner. Is it the right way to pronounce your name? And
Yeah.
her topic, yes, thank you so much. Then her topic is making art at home during the COVID-19 pandemic, young visitors Instagram, and museum collections. So you will begin at 11:15. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Emma June, and I'm a graduate student in the Department of Art Education at Concordia University. Today, I'll be presenting Making Art at Home During the COVID-19 Pandemic, Young Visitors, Instagram, and Museum Collections. So in Canada, mid-March 2020, most museums closed for several months due to the pandemic, forcing cultural institutions to reimagine ways of connecting with their visitors. As a result, museums began to share their works from their collections more regularly on social media, and also began to produce newer types of digital content, such as virtual visits, behind the exhibition videos, web conferences, and all kinds of other activities to entertain people at home. So although many museums had already begun to have a wider presence on social media in order to promote their exhibitions pre-COVID-19, the pandemic made these platforms instrumental in allowing visitors to continue to engage with their institutions from home. As an art teacher and a museum education researcher who follows many of these Canadian museums on social media, I quickly noticed several museums sharing arts and craft activities, and I wondered if Instagram had previously been used by you museum educators to teach art making. So while it was used in many ways during the lockdown in Canada, I'm going to explore specifically the art making initiatives and approaches that museum education departments have put in place during the pandemic using Instagram. A few of the questions that were guiding my study were, how did Canadian art museum educators use Instagram? What kind of art making activities were offered to the public? And what are the implications for art education and museum educators? The rationale for my study is that the increase in use of digital technology by cultural institutions, and in particular this new type of content, will most likely permanently impact the museum education landscape. And although it's rooted in the pandemic, which means it's bound in a limited time frame, I hope it'll serve as a record in the shift of this use of Instagram by museum educators. So just quickly, a few terms that I use. An Instagram post are the traditional photographs that users share in their gallery on an account's page. A story are the images that are shared for 24 hours and then can be saved as highlights, which are stories that last longer, that can be saved forever actually on an Instagram page. And lastly, there's IGTV, which are a video format that you can share on Instagram of videos up to an hour. There's also Reels, which is a new function, but museums haven't been exploring it very much, so it wasn't considered in this study. I analyzed Instagram art making content in light of George Simon's theory of connectivism, which highlights the importance of information technology and learning networks and is rooted in social constructivism and network theory. I also examine it in light of sequence learning that's been discussed in the context of instructional science by Ritter and Nerb, as the order in which material is presented can strongly influence what is learned, how fast performance increases, and sometimes even whether the material is learned at all. Although in art education and museum education, they tend to favor student-centered learning, sequence learning was adopted in these Instagram posts. At the time of writing, there isn't much research on museum digital initiatives and COVID-19. It mainly appears as the form as official reports by UNESCO and ICOM, which is the International Council of Museums, which go over and list all the different types of initiatives that have come out of COVID-19. In addition, there isn't much literature on museums and Instagram. There are a few studies, however, that address the way visitors use the application in the museum space itself, but there's less research on how the museum itself uses Instagram to reach its visitors. Finally, I thought it was important to consider, since it's children that are making these art projects from home, because that's what's indicated in the captions of these different videos, I wanted to see what was written about the kinds of activities that Canadian families took up during the pandemic. And I considered specifically, there was one survey that examined how children and youth movement and play behaviors changed because of the pandemic. And it indicates actually that many families took up arts and crafts as an activity. It's listed as the top activity after screen time. And my research addresses arts and screen time, basically. So my research design was qualitative in nature and used a descriptive multi-case study approach. And I then used Gillian Rose's 4 sites of production and the 3 modalities that influence these sites in order to develop a coding scheme for the visual content analysis of the cases in my study. The 4 sites of an image are the site of the production, the site of the image itself, the site of audiencing, and the site of circulation. And then each of these modalities can be broken down into the technological, the compositional, and the social, which all go modify these 4 sites that I previously mentioned. And I specifically then went in and looked at different elements that were particular to Instagram, such as filters, hashtags, stickers, emojis, or any other visual things that were used specific to Instagram. So the entire image as well as the caption was considered the data for the project. Oops, sorry. And then, I developed this detailed coding rubric that I'll quickly move over because I'm going to present the different cases that were in my study. So I had, it's important to note the Northwest Territories, the Yukon, and the Prince Edward Islands museums did not use Instagram to share art activities during the pandemic. And then the Beaver Art Gallery in New Brunswick only started later in December, but every other province is accounted for. And I looked at Instagram content from the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia, the Rooms, Musée d'Art Contemporain de Montréal, le Musée des Beaux-Arts de Montréal, the National Gallery of Canada, the Art Gallery of Ontario, the McKenzie Art Gallery, the Winnipeg Art Gallery of Alberta, and the Vancouver Art Gallery. I then manually gathered all the posts that were between December 2020 and January 2021, and I gathered only the content that was published during the first lockdown in Canada. So the first type of case was Instagram stories. So the National Gallery of Canada and the Vancouver Art Gallery are the only two museums who regularly used Instagram stories to share their art making activities. Each activity was divided into a certain number of slides that were then strung together to build up the story. The National Gallery of Canada offered its stories as part of a series called Crafternoons that was posted each Friday, and the proposed activities were inspired by different art in their collections, by events such as Mother's Day, or specific art techniques such as color mixing, and then additional information was available on Facebook. So the stories were pretty brief with the information for the lesson. The Vancouver Art Gallery also shared projects using the same step-by-step approach, so stringing together different slides for their stories, and they provided their additional information by linking us with the swipe up option a PDF to detailed description. Afterwards, the only museum who used Instagram posts is the Musée des Beaux-Arts de Montréal, and the image that made up each post itself was the inspiration artwork, and this artwork was accompanied by a narrated instructions, and every activity was tightly linked to the art in the collection, and viewers were encouraged to take up a certain art technique from the inspiration image. Finally, all the other museums included in the study and used IGTV to share their art activities, and these videos ranged from ones that included the art educator on screen to videos that only show the educator's hands and a certain making a craft accompanied by music. Or some of the videos didn't have any of this, and it was just animation music with text overlay. The data from these three types of Instagram content was then coded, and I developed three themes that I'm going to briefly discuss today. So the first one is a teaching tool. So first, prior to the pandemic, no Canadian art museum in the study had previously shared an art lesson using Instagram. In addition, with the exception of the Musée des Beaux-Arts, le Musée d'Art Contemporain, and the Art Gallery of Ontario, none of these museums had ever shared an IGTV video in itself at all. So I would like to compare these videos to the post-visit activities that are often accompanied in museum programming. The emergence of IGTV teaching content follows the more general popular trend during COVID-19, where people would follow video tutorials and DIY activities. And in fact, many of these IGTV videos were shared on YouTube, the exact same content, and received a lot less views on YouTube. So this suggests that visitors are following museums more closely on social networking platforms. And if museums want to reach a wider audience, they should be using Instagram. Moreover, museums choosing to teach art through an online platform aligns with Canadian families' general trends in their choice of activities during the pandemic, which includes the rise of arts and crafts with kids. It just remains to be seen if this is something that museums are going to continue to do after the end of the COVID-19 pandemic. Next, my next thing is sequential teaching and learning. So even though Instagram stories, posts, and IGTV are very different in terms of format, they all use the same step-by-step approach to teaching. So as previously mentioned, for Instagram stories, each slide made up the steps for the project, and the format for IGTV is a little bit more fluid because it's in a video format, so you don't have to tap through to see the steps. You can see it more fluidly. And the steps always included first briefly introducing an object from the museum collection or an art technique that was used in an artwork from the collection. Then the material for the project was clearly laid out on a table, followed by the presentation of the varying stages to complete the different suggested art projects. So in this way, the museums are simplifying the complex online learning networks that are often associated with connectivism, and they're bringing in the sequential learning by trying to break it up into different steps. In addition, learners can choose to pause a video, rewind, skip ahead, fast forward through the different steps, or same thing for stories. They can skip back in the story to see a previous step. And this highlights that learners are not engaging in a synchronous way with the work. It's asynchronous and they're moving through it at their own speed. The last theme I'd like to briefly go over is, I called it a woman's job, because in examining the site of the image itself, only the rooms in the Musée des Beaux-Arts de Montréal had a male voice narrator or a male educator. And in some cases, these female museum educators are even accompanied by their children who are making the suggested activity or are even delivering the instruction of the activity itself. So this Instagram content reveals some of the challenges women had in terms of working from home during the COVID-19 pandemic. And women including their children in the delivery of their activities for the museum also exposes this reality. And the gender discourse in museum education has been present ever since the beginning of museum education. Most notably, Klečka has investigated the historical connection between art museums and women, and she writes how it's a feminized field which has impacted today's museum education landscape. And the Instagram content that I analyzed sheds light on the important role of women today in the field. So to conclude, it's central to note that museum educators were not using Instagram as a platform to share art making activities before the pandemic. Every museum in this study began sharing this type of content after the outbreak of the disease, and Instagram clearly provided new opportunities for cultural institutions to share educational videos. It's also important to keep in mind that this can't be applied everywhere. I only looked at the 10 different studies that I examined. And even though I developed a very detailed coding scheme, I was the only one coding. So in the future, I would like to get somebody else as well to code the data following the scheme and corroborate what I've found. And it's left. Yeah. And so the discourse about social media and art education is not something that's new, but in the field of museum education, it's definitely something that hasn't been written about very much. So further research must be done to address it, especially post-pandemic, to see if any of these methods or types of content using Instagram are adopted long-term. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma June, for your very insightful presentation. And so this is the time for question periods. If you have any question, please ask. Oh yes, Marisa has already her hand. Great.
Actually, that was just an applause. Thank you very much, Emma June. I had a question for you. I'm a big museum buff and I work in education as well. And so I downloaded a bunch of stuff like Google Art and you know, to visit. I wonder if you wanted to sort of talk about what you think this might mean for museums. So I wondered if the fact that it's online means that there's a new population that, you know, are the people who were doing this stuff online different than the people who were going to the museums? So that's one. Yeah. And two is, what do you think? Do you think that after the pandemic, do you think that people will go back to museums, or do you think they'll stay online? If you can, I mean, I know it's like, I'm asking for your opinion. Yeah.
Well, I'm actually conducting research on this, kind of examining that in the context of TikTok, because I'm very interested in social media and museums.
Yeah.
And the Instagram, the way the algorithms work is you have to follow a museum to like for you to see their, I mean, you can still manually go to their account and see their information, but you're only seeing content when you open the app of accounts you follow. So they are reaching perhaps some broader people with hashtags, but what's very different about TikTok, which I really think will change things, is that the algorithm on TikTok, when you open it, you're not following necessarily people, the content that appears are not people you are following. It's content that's directed towards you. And since museums are adopting all these other challenges that are not necessarily museum challenges, people are stumbling on artwork and things that they wouldn't have otherwise that aren't. And so I potentially think that this might be able to reach broader and newer audiences for the museum. In terms of returning in person, I do know that a lot of museums have initiatives such as Educar in Montreal. We have that with the Musée des Beaux-Arts, and that's a way to allow rural communities and communities who can't necessarily come into the city to go to a museum to still have access. So I think there will just generally be more and more virtual museum experiences. I hope
very
that
much.
Partly answers.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
I have a question. I don't know how much time is left.
Yeah, you have time. You can do
okay.
that.
So I'm always kind of two minds when it comes to like art, like making art popular and making art accessible, because on the one hand, I have sort of like a capitalistic view where if people are not interested in the art, then the art is not interesting. And on the other hand, I think art is really important and that people need to be exposed to new things. So with all of like on a platform like TikTok or Instagram, like the museum is really competing with all of these other sources of entertainment and stimulation. And I'm just wondering like what do you think about that kind of that push and pull between like appealing to people and advertising versus like having your art and showing that off?
I think it's a really good question. I'm hoping that these, because it can quickly become a performance, or a short burst of entertainment. So the content that's being produced might not necessarily be educational, or might just be trying to follow a trend or trying to follow a challenge. But I think the way that we should shift it is how these platforms can become tools for people to use within the museum space or engaging with the museum space from home. So for example, TikTok, you can make videos in app. How can you creatively use the app to engage in a new way with the artwork itself? So I think that's the way I would like to hopefully like orient my research and bridge that gap between simply following a trend, or also presenting like the expert voice, like here, this is what I think. And then it's a social networking platform, so you need people in the middle to be able to engage with it as well.
Thanks, that's super interesting.
You have still 2 minutes. If you want to ask any question, you can ask.
I spoke so quickly because I was like, I need to have time to say everything.
No problem.
Emma
You have to unmute yourself, Mary.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
No. Yes.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Okay. I was wondering. This was a great presentation. I'd start there, but I'm wondering if anyone took this as an opportunity to do the online information bilingually, because one of the wonderful things about online is that anyone, anywhere can participate.
Yes, the Musée des Beaux-Arts de Montréal, you could swipe and have the narration in French or English, as well as the Beaver Book Gallery, which wasn't included in my study because they only started posting later in December, but they both approached, one was the narration, you could choose your language, and the other case, it was the text was displayed in both languages.
Great, yeah. Thank you.
I'm wondering if like you have a favorite example of the kinds of activities and things that museums put on.
Favorite, in many ways, even though it was a less popular approach, the Musée des Beaux-Arts de Montréal choosing to narrate their audio allows people to be more creative. So you're just listening to what you're meant to do. So you can really approach the project in your own way, which is something no other museum did this. So when I was listening and trying to do the projects myself, I have no idea what other people's projects would have ended up looking like. So.
Yeah. So thank you very much.
Thank you,
Emma June, for your great presentation. And the next presenter is Mary McPherson, and her topic is a case study of newcomer learning in Eastern Nova Scotia, and she'll start at 11:40. So welcome, Mary McPherson.
I need to upload. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I need to upload my my PowerPoint, and
No.
I think I know how to do it, but I'm not 100% sure.
Mary, you have to go to the main, because you are not the co-host, so you have to go to the main session. Then you will be able to the co-host. So you need to go to the main. You need to leave this room. Go to main session. Did you register?
Yes.
That in that case, Tiffany will make you a co-host, and then you will be able to share your screen here.
Great.
I can
I'll
go
see you shortly.
too. Like I'll go along to the main room and facilitate.
Yeah. Thank you, Amanda.
I think Amanda is so warm heart.
It
Exactly.
was
I
a
mean,
wonderful presentation.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Everything and
Oh,
yes, Tiffany, Mary is in the main session in order to be co-host.
She just went there, so I just
Yes,
her. Okay, I'll be back.
yes.
can I ask you a time? Can I ask you a time now?
Yes, it's 11:37.
11:37 a.m. or p.m.?
It's a.m.
Oh, okay.
So what is your time now?
It's 12:37 7 p.m.
p.m. So it's like afternoon.
No, it's evening, I think.
Okay.
Got that.
I'm back. All right.
Great. Great to have you.
And I can share desktop 1, right?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Right.
you can. Yeah.
And
Yes.
then I'm there. All
Yes,
right.
here you go.
Thank you. I am a serious techno dolt, so I have my concerns.
So, Mary, I'm Matia. So I'm going to show you this 5 minutes when the 5 minutes are left. And then I'm going to show you this 2 minutes and then the 1 minute.
Okay. Thank
It's a
you.
good reminder.
And it's 15 minutes that I have to talk, right?
Yes, and then you have 5 minutes for questions, answers.
Great.
Mary, I just want to make sure, are you comfortable with us seeing your whole screen? Like as you click through the slides, we're going to see your notes the way it's set up right now. Is that okay? Or do you want to set
Oh,
it up
that's
so we
fine.
just see the
Yes.
slides?
I don't,
Okay.
I haven't got notes in the bottom, so
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah, it's 11:40. Mary, you can start now.
Okay. I'm gonna. All right. So. This is a summary of my project, the role that informal learning plays in the integration experience of immigrants to rural Nova Scotia. And I think it's important to add, as each defines integration for her himself, because there are so many different notions of integration and it's often seen as a pejorative term, but in this case, I'm really looking for how people feel most comfortable in their home. I put up a couple of informal learning definitions because there are multitudes of different ways of looking at it. The first one is by David Livingstone, who's Canadian adult educator who has been active in informal learning research for forever. And he says, for most adults, informal learning continues to represent our most important learning for coping with our changing environment. And Linda Morris is an adult educator from the UK whose focus has been on refugee integration there. And she says informal, social, and community-based learning can be a potent catalyst for change and personal development. And I like both of these definitions because of the focus on change and coping with a radically changed and shifting environment is often a daily experience for newcomers. And so it seems to really work for me in terms of what I was looking at. I took on this project because I've always been interested in the place where people culturally intersect and in shifting languages, shifting cultures. But in particular, what I realized as I was looking at the research is there's a limited amount on informal learning process from the perspective of immigrants in their own words. I'm actually retired and just in another phase in my life, but for the last 40 years, I've worked in public policy, looking particularly at economic and social justice. And I was frequently the person who said, where are the voices of the people who are being affected? And I was really struck when I looked at the research that although there's sometimes quotations from newcomers on a specific project, in very, very few cases have people said, how have you done this work? What was your experience in your community? And so I took it on. And secondly, communities that are studied when they are almost always huge metropolitan areas. As you can see, over 60% of all Canadian immigrants actually reside in the metropolitan districts of the 3 largest cities in the country. So the rural areas there are fewer newcomers, but they have been ignored in the research. I'm having a little trouble with this, hold on. Okay, this is a profile of my research participants. I'd like to start by saying that there's a real challenge in doing case studies in rural areas because it is by nature a small group of people who live there. And what I found was that as soon as I started to try to describe the details of the person's situation in any way or to do any identifying, I couldn't do it because I'm using pseudonyms, I'm keeping this confidential, and there's no way to do that because as soon as you say that someone works in a hair salon or what country they're from, people can start to know who they are. So what I've done so far, and I've written a research paper, and I'm just about to start my thesis. So I need to still grapple with how I'm going to do that presentation there. But for now, I'm aggregating, and I'll tell you that there are 3 women and 2 men, ages 30 to 45. I talked to people in 2 communities about 58 kilometers apart, 2 in one, 3 in the other. They're from 5 countries on 3 continents. They are highly educated. All of them have undergraduate degrees and 2 of them have master's degrees. 2 came to Canada with a Canadian spouse, 2 came as students and then found employment, and 1 came on a work visa. And I only interviewed 5 people. It's not representative of the newcomer community in these 2 towns, but and so I was talking to outliers. And one of the outlier situations, which I didn't put in here, is that initially I had planned to talk to people who were at intermediate English language level. And I would gotten my approval through the ethics board and was just about ready to go, and COVID struck. And my plan had been to interview people in person. And when I realized that I was going to have to do this on Zoom, that it was going to have to be online, I felt very uncomfortable in talking to people who had limited English skills, because it's just so much harder to catch people's signals and to understand, and to do communication. So I waited for several months hoping that COVID would go away, and of course it didn't. And so I ended up shifting to talking to 5 people who were quite proficient at this point in English. And I'm really glad that I did, because they enjoyed the conversation, and it ended up being a really rich conversation for, I hope, all of us. Obviously, I purposely selected the participants. I had a brief phone conversation with each of them to just make sure that they were clear on what we were doing, and then had an hour interview with each of them on Zoom. They were semi-structured interviews, but remarkably free-flowing. And I would just say that I transcribed the interviews myself and coded them. I am so glad that I did the transcriptions myself, that I didn't try to do it electronically or to have someone else transcribe them, because I embedded in my brain so many of the quotations from people, and I could use the information in ways that I couldn't if I hadn't actually typed every word into my computer. I looked particularly in 3 areas about informal learning: English language acquisition, the importance of social connections, and that's with locals and also with other newcomers, particularly from, excuse me, the individual's homeland, and then the dynamics of a rural community as compared to the metropolitan area. And I know that I have very limited time, so what I'm going to do today is to really focus on language acquisition. And I will just briefly touch on the other 2. Okay. Okay, I'm going to first talk about the 2 people who had almost no English at all when they arrived. The other 3 people had extensive English knowledge and were in a very different situation. The 2 who did not speak English when they landed in Canada were Danya and Rodrigo. Danya said that she was not that strong a person to say, okay, I will speak whether people understand or not. I found that people didn't have time to listen to someone who doesn't speak English. I should say that she came with her husband and settled in a very small town in a very remote area. And it was a very a non-inclusive community that she landed in. Her situation changed seriously when she moved to a larger town. And Rodrigo had an amazing experience. He arrived, his wife was an Anglophone Canadian who already had a community in town and who welcomed him in. But he describes himself as a very social person, which he exemplified in our interview. He's very personable, and he was extremely motivated to learn English so he could communicate. That was important to him. That was his first priority. And he told me how he'd take his infant child with him down to Main Street, and he'd go to the library or he'd go to the park, or he would just walk up to people on the street and say, I am new here. I really need to learn English. Will you talk to me? And he said, most of the people were nice. They tried to understand what I was trying to say, and they actually taught me. He acknowledges that these street encounters were challenging because sometimes you feel shy and you have the chance to get embarrassed, or other times you've got the chance to get along with that person. And he found that it wasn't just going to Main Street. He would talk to anyone at any time.
5 minutes left.
Oh dear. And he made the important point that he was thinking in his own language when he first arrived, but that he shifted to trying to understand what the structure of English was so that he could replicate that, so that he would actually start to be able to think in English. And that was something that several other people mentioned as well. Danya, who was one of the people who didn't speak any English when she arrived, had a lot of things to say about the local language school, that it's really important to have one-on-one connection, because all of the other people have different issues, different levels of ability, and some people have heavy memories. In particular, she was talking about the refugees in the community, and so that it was a distraction, and that she found that one-on-one was the most effective thing for her. Again, something that the other people stressed as well, and I like that, and it fit in with the notion of informal one-on-one learning. 3 people talked about how they got confident. I'll start with Rodrigo and say, I still make lots of mistakes while I'm speaking, but I'm not frustrated anymore. People understand me, people talk to me. And for me, that's the most important thing, the communication we can have. And Roeen said, it's okay if I cannot be perfect. I should practice and participate for me to improve. I just stopped worrying about it. And I think both of those, it all started to fit together for me in terms of people's best language learning. They all agreed that language was the foundation. They had achieved a fluency that worked for them. They identified a number of factors that helped them in achieving it, including their language level on arrival, support systems available, opportunities for conversation, personal temperament, and persistence. In terms of social connections, each had found a level of friendship they sought. Danya identified herself as being shy, and she had one best friend who she had supported her since her arrival. Others had a multitude network of people who they were engaged with. They also all had assisted other newcomers as they arrived. One of the women had been one of 5 people from her homeland, and by the time, and today there are dozens of people. They have a supportive network of people. Thank you. And the participants were all from big cities. They found local people in their towns to be friendly, open, interconnected, and with more time for social engagement. Roeen was talking about how, in fact, when she was in her 15 million population home city, she didn't talk to strangers either, that it was really, that there's a quality of life in rural communities that work for her. And I want to say that it works for these people. Small towns are not for everyone. And I know that its case studies are not, you can't make generalizations, but I think what I'm hoping this research will help with is people thinking about how to find the benefits in rural living, and how people, particularly in adult education learning situations, can facilitate ways that people can be connected as they wish to be, in order to be able to immerse themselves in English through conversation, through social engagement, or whatever other ways they want to do that. And that's it.
Yes, thank you very much, Mary, for your very insightful presentation. And it's like you do case study, and then I really like the way you did that, especially during this pandemic. So thank you for that. So this is the period for question answers. If you have any question, you please ask Mary. You can stop share your screen, Mary.
There. I'm bigger.
Hey, Mary. Hi, thanks so much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. It's only that I didn't join in early, so I couldn't get a piece of it. And I'm just wondering, is it part of your like a master's or a PhD program?
It's a master's program.
A master's program.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And what's the focus of the program, please?
Adult education.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, but I find it very interesting. I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. That's all my question, though.
I have just not a question. It's just a curiosity. I mean, how do you think that? How does learning a new language like help them to integrate in the mainstream society? Because my concern is, even if learning a new language, learning English at this age and at this stage doesn't really make them, standard speaker of English, and doesn't really help them to get the standard course of language. So does it really help them to integrate?
My reaction to that is a very narrow focus, and I'll try to think broader. But when I was doing the interviews, I had an absolutely fantastic time talking with each person. It was a wonderful experience for me, and I hope for them too. When I was talking with them, it was completely fluid. We talked back and forth, and I would ask them questions that clearly took reflection and were abstract, and they had clearly been thinking these things and were happy to have someone to say them to. So it was all very positive. And then when I did the transcription, it was a surprise to me when I realized that several of them had a lot of grammatical mistakes and said a lot of ums and ahs just the way I do, and but none of that was in my awareness when we had the conversation. And I think for me, what talking all the time in English and being able to think in English with or without the grammar is it gives you a chance to connect with people in a way that makes you a part of a place and comfortable and in a position to be able to do a human exchange with someone else. And I really rushed through the last part of my talk, but a piece which I didn't say is that for all that many people talked about how they said, I'm doing the best I can and I don't care anymore if I make mistakes. Those were also people who went in and had one-on-one lessons with the local language school. One, because she wanted to go back to school and she knew she was going to have to do a lot of writing, and two of the people who came with a lot of experience with English just wanted to be able to catch some of the specifics of grammar. So and I lost that balance when I was talking because I was running too fast. But I think that the two things really do fall together. But if you feel comfortable and you are being understood, there's even more, I think there's more positive incentive to get it better, grammatically speaking. But the human connection is what makes people's lives positive. So I think that that's it, being able to do that kind of cross communication is sort of the baseline for integration for anyone, no matter how they choose to do that.
Yeah, it's a great insight. Thank you. And Amanda has a question, I think. Yes.
Yeah, so you mentioned that you have a background in policy. So because of that, I assume, I could be wrong, that you have some ideas about how about systems that might be able to support people better based on this new information. Is that true? Like, what do you think?
Ooh, that's a big question. And I guess that I've looked at this more through the lens of adult education. And so to a large extent, when I've been thinking about what do I hope, if anything, comes out of this, it's to provide a greater, a broader perspective for language teachers about how to encourage people to engage in informal learning. A lot of people, a lot of teachers kind of think that what they're doing there, and a lot of students too, think that what they're doing there is where people are learning. And it's maybe 8 hours a week. And there's a whole lot of other hours when people need to be doing the reinforcement and having the meaningful dialogue that they want to have. So that's been really my strategic thought. And I guess the policy would come in reform of the whole language school requirements. One of the things is there's the citizenship book was awful. It was Discover Canada. I was helping someone who was going to take the citizenship test, and it was dry, and it was British, and it was a little preachy. And there's a new book that's come out with the new prime minister, which is a far more inclusive and culturally diverse book than the one before. So I think that kind of top-down change in message is important. And the other piece is that I'm a US citizen, and so I very lightly have some of the same issues that the newcomers have in terms of bureaucracy. And I did legal services work, and I have a really hard time with the immigration website. And I think it would be really important to have a much better advocacy system for people in terms of how they work through permanent residency, citizenship, job certification, all of those things. It's kind of a random anarchistic process from what I can tell at this point. It's not really directly on what I'm doing, but I mean, people have to wait for very long periods of time to be told that they didn't file something right. So, I mean, there's just that whole system, I think, grinds people down. So
yeah, thank you so much, Mary. And with Mary, this is the end of the morning session. Thanks for joining with us. We'll start again at 1:10. So thank you very much. See you in the afternoon session. And you can have your lunch now.
Thank you.
On your own.
So bye for now.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.